Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Like to start by thanking all of you for coming. I would also like to thank the Saudi Society for Comparative Literature with the support of Literature Publishing and Translation Commission for organizing tonight's event. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with me, my name is Alaa الغامدي. I'm a professor of English at Taiba University, Medina Munawwara, and I am humbled to have been honored with the task of moderating this seminar, as well as introducing to you one of the most prominent scholars of critical and post-colonial thought, Dr. Hamid Debashie. The topic of today's seminar is a simple question: where is world literature? This is a very important topic in the view of many thinkers, scholars, and people who tend to take a more intellectual approach to life. World literature is not located in any one place. It's a body of work that spans the globe, includes work from all cultures and time periods. It's a constantly evolving field that is continuously being enriched by the new works from different cultures. World literature is seen as a more inclusive field that includes work from all cultures. And today we have with us a scholar who has been doing his part to explore and promote this subject. I'm confident that you will find the information presented to be both enlightening and useful. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Hamid Debashie. Dr. Debashie has proven to be a committed scholar for over 4 decades, if I'm not mistaken, has written over 24 books and authored over 100 essays, articles, book reviews in major scholarly and peer-reviewed journals on subjects ranging from Iranian studies, medieval and modern Islam, comparative literature, world cinema, and the philosophy of art. Dr. Debashie will be talking about the importance of getting to the bottom of the topic at hand, where is world literature? Whilst knowing he is a prominent voice in the matter, we can rest assured that he will have much to say, leaving us with the task of being open and willing to learn. I'm sure that you will find Dr. Debashie's presentation to be very informative. After Dr. Debashie's presentation, we will have a question and answer session. I hope you will find all of today's seminar to be very enjoyable. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm proud to present to you Dr. Hamid Debashie.
Thank you, Alaa. Can you hear me? Lovely.
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. All the pleasure and honor is mine. As I told Samahir, and as I'm sure you all know, your country, your culture, your civilization is precious and important for millions and millions of Muslims around the world. I have never had the pleasure and the honor and the gift of visiting Saudi Arabia, both as a Muslim, but now in the context of my colleagues in the field of literature. I very much hope, as I told Samahir, that in sometime in future, I will be able to have that pleasure. That's number one. Number two, I can't tell you how happy I am that my colleagues in Saudi Arabia have paid attention to the work I do. The only complaint I have is, why so late? Where have you been so far? I've been writing left and right, but better late than never. The subject that I thought I will share some thoughts with you today is, given our mutual interest in comparative literature, is the issue of world literature. Ordinarily, the question is asked, what is world literature? But in my recent work, I have changed the question, because when you write a book like my distinguished colleague David Damrosch, what is world literature? The answer is, well, I will explain, this is world literature. Whereas I think at this stage of our critical thinking, we are upstream from the question of what is world literature, and more fundamentally, we need to ask ourselves, where exactly is world literature? For example, if somebody, a scholar, a critical thinker, a literary theorist, sitting in Riyadh or in Mecca or in Baghdad or in Tehran or in Istanbul, if they were to think about world literature, how would they think about world literature? In other words, I'm reshifting the critical and theoretical concern of our issue away from what is world literature, which gives it a kind of an ideological or metaphysical twist, to the location of world literature. Now, a quick summary, as most of you know, the idea of world literature was first, in the way we have received it, formulated by the German scholar, literary thinker, poet Goethe, who for the first time used the term Weltliteratur, world literature. And it was his student and follower Eckermann who, by 1835, sort of put together some of the writings of Goethe. And since then, the issue of world literature has been of concern to many comparative literary scholars. In Goethe's initial formulation, he tells us that he was fascinated by aspects of Chinese fiction, Persian and Serbian poetry. And as you know, he became a very enthusiastic supporter and follower of Hafiz, and followed the Persian poet Hafiz in model, and composed a book, Ves Oslische Divan, the East-West Divan, that then more recently, my own colleague Edward Said, Allah yarhamhu, put together a music orchestra with that Barenboim, in which they sort of revived the idea of Ves Oslische Divan. Beginning with its original formulation, the way that Goethe thought of world literature was a comparison between national literature and world literature. And his idea was that eventually the idea of national literature will ultimately disappear into a more worldly context. And that worldly context obviously involves assumption or parameters or considerations of world literature. Now, the issue, of course, did not remain limited to Goethe. Subsequent scholars and thinkers and philosophers, etc., have been thinking about world literature or world philosophy or world music or world history. So the issue that not limited conceptions of literature, but a more comparative and global conception of literature is not limited to literature. It has echoes in other fields. One of the issues that, and then based on that, you may say subsequent generations from Marx to Habermas, when they talk about formation of the transnational public sphere, or the bourgeois public sphere, that bourgeois public sphere in which world literature begins to express and manifest itself, brings the issue of comparative literature, world literature, to our own time. One of the first issues that we face in our, and then right now you have anthologies of world literature that you have a little bit of Arabic literature, some Chinese literature, some Persian literature, some Turkish literature, and European literature. Put them together like a salami sandwich, and then you have everything represented in it. That is a more kind of popular conception of world literature. The theoretical underpinning of it, that is what exactly is world literature, towards which I have put the spin of, I don't want to know what is world literature, I want to know where is the world literature, becomes an issue. Let me give you a specific example of what Goethe introduced, the comparison between national literature and world literature. National literature, in what way can we talk about Saudi literature, which is different from Arabic literature? Arabic literature is already comparative literature. As you know well, they say that they write books in Cairo, they publish them in Beirut, and they read them in Baghdad. So already there is a comparativity and transnationality to the idea of Arabic literature, that somebody like Ibn Mahfouz or Sana'allah Ibrahim or whoever writes a novel or a piece of poetry in one Arab country, but does not remain national literature. It becomes already transnational literature. So this is the first issue that we have, that when the distinguished American literary scholar Frederick Jameson said all national literature are political allegories, and Ijaz Ahmad, may he rest in peace, took issue with it, and others took issues with it, is the fact that the formation of national literature is not limited. And the same is, I would say, about the Spanish literature. Something that is produced in Spanish in Latin American context, say in Mexico or Argentina, or in Colombia, when somebody like Marquez was Colombian, writes a book, 100 Years of Solitude, it is a Latin American piece of literature, and expresses in its composition, its literary taste, in the political apparatus of its literary disposition. It has larger than Colombia. It's not national literature. It's already transnational literature. Now, as you well know, the issue of world literature has been the subject of heated theoretical debates, especially here in North America, by scholars ranging from David Damrosch to Franco Moretti to Gayatri Spivak, as to what exactly is world literature. And one of the issues that has been discussed among these three, Moretti, Damrosch, and Spivak, is the issue of close reading or distant reading. When Moretti for the first time proposed the idea of distant reading, that it is impossible for a comparatist to have detailed, close knowledge of work done in Chinese and Arabic and Spanish and etc. We need distant reading, not close reading, to which responds Spivak in her seminal book, Death of a Discipline, that in fact we need close reading. The issue as a result that has preoccupied me is not the comparison between national and world literature, because I don't think there is anything like national literature. All national literature already is transnational literature, as examples of Spanish and Arabic shows really well. But the provenance of this articulation of world literature, which is very European and remains European. And as a result, the idea of world that they have, it is a world imagined with Europe at its center, and with a very, to be sure, liberal attitude. That is, they go to Chinese literature or Arabic literature or Spanish literature or whatever, and they say, ahlan wa sahlan, tell us the best that you have in your literature, when we include it in idea of world literature. I think despite the liberal disposition of this attitude, it is not satisfactory, because the world that they imagine is already imagined. And the world at large, people are literary theorists outside European context, have not had a say in the formation of this idea of world literature. And as a result, the task in front of us is not to say, okay, there is a wonderful thing called world literature, and we Arabs or Iranians or Turks or Latin Americans, we have these amazing, wonderful aspects of our literature which we would like to submit to be considered into world literature. What has happened and what has preoccupied me is the fact of the multiplicity of worlds that exist outside Europe, namely, and the recent gestation of the very idea of Europe. Plato did not think of himself as a European. Homer did not think of himself as a European. This idea of Europe and European literature and European imagination is a very recent formation. And as a result, if we go to different worldly contexts, Abu Hayyan al-Tawhidi, I'm just thinking, Abu Nawas al-Ahwazi, for example, any great poet, any great literary stylist, any person who has produced aspects of world literature in multiple worlds. But for me, now I'm talking about works of literature produced in Arabic, in Persian, in Turkish, and Urdu. Then you see that there is a different world. It's not just that we have produced literature. That literature is predicated on a different world. And we need to understand the particularities and the provenances and the historical periodizations of those worlds. And those periodizations have to be done in terms specific and domestic to the literary experiences of these worlds. And take, for example, the expression comparative literature that comes to Arabic and becomes al-adab al-muqarin. Al-adab al-muqarin. We have departments of al-adab al-muqarin. The expression and experience and the literary parameters of comparative literature, littérature comparée in French or whatever, does not become Arabic just simply by the neologism of al-adab al-muqarin. We need to begin, first of all, al-adab is not entirely literature. Al-adab has a whole different sort of systematicity of meaning and context that is not limited to what later is coined as literature. So we need to begin, for example, with adab. What world is adab? My own distinguished teacher, George Makdisi, Allah yarhamhu, wrote a whole book on the rise of al-adab in Arabic context. Following him, I wrote a book on Persian adab in a sort of more Eastern provinces. You can do on Turkish adab, etc. So adab as a category, as a concept, needs attention. Equally important is periodizations that happen within adab, for which reason I find the expression medieval Islamic literature extremely, unsatisfactory and meaningless. Medieval, medieval. When is medieval? Medieval was a concept created in European historiography. And it's perfectly legitimate for European historiography, despite the fact that some European historians are beginning to question this periodization of modern, medieval, ancient, and so forth. So we need, in terms of even periodization, begin to think in terms of the world of literature or the world of adab, within which then there must be some sort of periodization based on, for example, the process of canonization that have happened. Equally important is the word world, because in Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Turkish, etc., when we say dunya, the word dunya is, yes, it corresponds, if you look at dictionary, Arab or Firuzabadi or whatever, dunya is world. But dunya carries connotations and meanings that in our context has different resonances. For example, dunya is always matched with deen wa dunya. Deen wa dunya. The two go together. And as a result, they have resonances. Or a prophetic tradition that we have. Ad-dunya kal-mazra'atul akhirah. So dunya is not a word that you can sort of surgically remove it as the word adab. We cannot surgically remove it from its natural habitat, a worldly habitat that is informed by generations of poets and literary stylists and historians and philosophers and theologians and mystics and etc., and place it next to world. So we need to understand how we understand the word world, or how do we understand the word adab. And once we do that, a whole different genealogy is generated for al-adab al-muqarin. For example, if we are even to do, in order to do al-adab al-muqarin, first of all, we have to understand what is adab and what are the provenances of adab, and what's the relationship, say, from in adab as produced in Arabic or in Persian or in Urdu or in Turkish, that have shades of meanings related to each other and resonate with each other and respond to each other, that then generates its own world. So my proposal as a result in my work has been that we need, before we come into world literature as understood and theorized and philosophized and articulated by thinkers ranging from Goethe to Damrosch to Franco Moretti, etc., for which we're all grateful, thank you very much, but it's not sufficient. That is, that we will have done structural violence, epistemic violence, to alternative worlds that have existed: Chinese literature, Japanese literature, Arabic literature, Persian literature. If we just, like Goethe said, oh, I just read a Chinese novel or a Persian poet and it was really good, and we should include it in world literature. As I said, that kind of ecumenical liberalism is to be appreciated and understood, but is not theoretically sufficient. The task of the next generation of scholarship and critical thinkers is to begin to take words such as adab, both historically and theoretically, seriously, and begin the task of theorization, not by way of saying, okay, there is a world literature done in German or French or English. Now, how do I do it in Arabic? Because that results in al-adab al-muqarin. Because if we sort of take a genre like maqama, the maqama in Arabic is a particular genre, but that genre did not fall from the sky, has a specificity, has a historicity, has a modus operandi that we have to understand and is different. Or say, for example, works that have been considered as the first manifestation of novels. Novel, like Hay ibn Yaqzan, for example. Yes, it has resemblances to contemporary novel, but novel is they say novel is a European phenomenon. Novel is not. I used to have this discussion with Edward Said, Allah yarhamhu. So novel is not a European phenomenon. Novel is a bourgeois phenomenon. Anywhere that bourgeoisie appears, novel appears, following Bakhtin's theorization of multiplicities of voices. And we should not assimilate backward the particular literary moments of a different literary culture, Arabic, Persian, Chinese, whatever, assimilate it backward into a way that the European theorization understands it. It does, as I said, epistemic violence to that. So to cut to the chase, and conclude so we can have more conversation rather than me just being monological. Shifting the question from what is world literature to where is world literature allows us to morally, imaginatively, intellectually, literary-wise, shift the locus classicus of where world literature is and begin to think about world literature from that location. In a way, you may say that what Moretti proposes in his take on world literature, that the idea of Emanuel Wallerstein about world economy and world system sort of allows us to think of world literature in terms of a worldly context in which globalization has made it possible for certain kind of literature to be produced that, as Franco Moretti says, sustains the legitimacy and authority and supremacy of Europe. And then in his famous modern epic, book on modern epic, he includes, for example, Marquez, about which I have written that, in fact, Marquez subverts the idea of assuming a kind of modern epic as Moretti proposes it in a way that sustains the world system. It subverts the world system because it comes from a colonial world that came up with magic realism, and magic realism that has fascinated the world, and the world system cannot accommodate that magic realism. Just as one example of how, within the context of Latin American literature, a text such as 100 Years of Solitude of Marquez can and should enable us to think of a different conception of world literature that remains true and responsive and responsible to the world in which this piece of literature was produced, rather than dragging it, performing epistemic violence on it in order to drag it into the world system of the way that Moretti understands it. These are, to be sure, preliminary remarks, that is simply say to sort of clear the table, to say now we need to begin to think. If we begin to say, if the site of our articulation of world literature is Riyadh, or is Baghdad, or is Cairo, or is Tehran, thus changing the location, we will have a different conception of world literature that speaks to the veracity and specificity of the world in which this was produced. So the distinction and the dichotomy is not between national literature and world literature, is actually between multiple world literatures that it is now our responsibility to begin to and first of all acknowledge it, that it exists, and second to historicize and document it, and third to theorize it and see how, for example, the issue of canonization within this world literature would be articulated. And if you allow me, Professor Al-Ghamdi, I'm going to stop here, sort of have outlined where my position is, what I'm suggesting, and then I'll be happy to continue my thoughts in the course of our conversation.
Great, wonderful. That was, thank you for this amazing talk. I think we should, it would be a good idea to open the floor for any questions or comments. I would urge you, please to make it short as much as you can. Anyone? I've got a couple of questions of my own, but I'll give the floor to the participants, taking notes as well. Anybody? You can just raise your hand or drop a question in the chat box.
You allow me, Dr. Alaء?
Please,
first, I want to welcome Dr. Hamid Debashir. We are thrilled and honored to have you tonight, and it's such a great pleasure for us to be the first, maybe, society to invite you to this world, to Saudi Arabia, and we hope soon to have you, inshallah, in person, so we can celebrate you as you deserve, Dr. Debashir. I would like also to thank you a lot for this thoughtful and informative talk, and it was also pleasant also to listen to. I have two questions for you. One about the last point you mentioned about the world comparative literature or world literature today is not about dichotomy as much as the multiple world literature, but like, how can that be possible in practical way? Like, if we want to apply that on a study, can we, let's say, consider a study from one language or one country as a comparative literature, or it really should be like two or more than one literature to direct this study? My second question is about Iranian cinema, actually, because I know you have some interest in cinema too. And Iranian cinema it has its own magic and mystery, I think. In a way, it's simple. It doesn't have that huge industry or money, I would say, to it. But at the same time, it is able to reach the world, I would say. It gained such interest, and everywhere I know a lot of scholars in the US studying Iranian cinema. So you may give us some or shed some light on that also, like what's the secret of Iranian cinema? And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Samar. Thank you, first of all, for your very kind and generous invitation. I can't tell you how happy and proud I am that I am addressing my Saudi colleagues. I'm a bit also kind of sad that it has happened so late in my. You needed to make sure that I actually have something to say, but I'm delighted that I am addressing my Saudi colleagues. Both questions are extremely important. I'll try to be brief so there is more room for more conversation about the issue. So how do we go about and do world literature from multiple locations? Obviously, as an Iranian and as a Muslim, my concern is about the world in which I was born and raised, and I became a literary, have a literary consciousness. But what I'm saying here could equally be applied, say, to Latin American context or African context or rest of Asian context. Number one is to have a critical stand vis-a-vis this notion of al-adab al-muqaran that we have borrowed from European context, and don't think if we just translate comparative literature into al-adab al-muqaran, then we're home, we're okay. Second is to realize that the binary between national and world is a false binary. That in our kind of world, that there is Egyptian and Iraqi and Syrian and Saudi and at least even within the Arabic context. Then we are in a context that, as I said, a different world emerges. But that world is not limited now that we are in that location. Is not limited to one language, but it's adjacent languages. That has to do partially with my own biography. I was born and raised in southern part of Iran. My father used to cook for us, Allah yarhamhu, and he used to listen to Radio Basra. So I grew up with the music of Kulthum and Sumbati and Abdul Halim Hafiz and so forth. So border countries, border areas in which Persian and Arabic and Turkish and Urdu and such, they're created. That is the world in which Abu Ala al-Ma'arri, for example, and Khayyam, despite the fact that they didn't know each other's work, have a similar worldview in terms of their poetry. But when Kulthum reads Omar Khayyam, she does not get Omar Khayyam directly from Persian. She gets it from its Fitzgerald translation. It has to do with the power of colonialism. So Fitzgerald translates it, becomes a global phenomenon, riding on the back of British colonialism. So somebody in the company of Kulthum hears it and sort of writes the songs that Kulthum sings. So how do we do world literature? We begin, first of all, theoretically, we need to be conversant with what has happened from Goethe to Damrosch to Moretti, etc. We need to be conversant with them, with their works. So if we do have a critical stand, as we should, it is not in isolation and in sentiment, but it's factual evidence. Second is to begin to theorize Arabic literature, Persian literature, Turkish literature from ground up, not historiography, not just to say, okay, here's the history of Arabic literature, but begin to theorize Arabic literature in terms of what kind of world they were operating. What kind of work was adab? The adab is rooted in the 8th and 9th century cosmopolitan context of Baghdad. This is where adab emerges as a literary proposition. So we have to understand that this is the context, this is the literary context based on the urban cosmopolitanism of Baghdad of the 8th and the 9th century, late Umayyad, early Abbasid period, when adab emerges as a literary language that is, yes, is rooted in Arabic, but it has a multiple gestations. When Ibn Muqaffa, for example, translates Kilila wa Dimna, the Arabic translation of Kilila wa Dimna by Ibn Muqaffa becomes a model of Arabic prose that from Taha Hussein to others begin to marvel at the Arabic. And he was probably a convert. He was of an Iranian origin. He was translating something from Arabic. That is the world that we are missing if we just take Kilila wa Dimna and say, oh, okay, this is a beautiful work of literature, and it has been translated from Arabic into Hebrew and Latin and all other European languages. Would you please consider it as world literature? That is not sufficient. What is necessary is to begin to think of the world that begins in Panchatantra and Mahabharata, comes to the Pahlavi translation of the 7th century, comes to the Arabic translation of Ibn Muqaffa early in the Islamic period, and boom, goes viral, as we would say today, through that Arabic translation. So capturing the world of Ibn Muqaffa and the composition of Kilila wa Dimna as one example, there are myriads of other examples, is one way of beginning to go to the ground zero of the formation of world literature in a different world. In this case, the world of Arabic. Quickly about Iranian cinema, there is much to be said about Iranian cinema, but and I know there is a tremendous interest in it in the entirety of the Arab world, particularly in Saudi Arabia. What is the secret of Iranian cinema? There is no secret. Mufida, for me, I always gave the example of a magnificent Tunisian filmmaker, Mufida Talatli, Sumt al-Ghusur, her masterpiece. Every culture in the Palestinian cinema right now, on which I have written and I have worked a lot, is one of the greatest formations of cinema because of the issues of Palestine. So in Syria, for example, we don't have a great cinema because there is a great television industry. And the same is about Egyptian cinema. So I don't think we should mystify Iranian cinema. We should put it in the context. However, there is a synergy that happened in the aftermath of one female filmmaker, Furun Farrokhzad, when she made The House is Black in the 1960s, she happened to articulate a particular kind of realism that is poetic realism, that is rooted in the lived experiences of a woman, that then sort of other filmmakers begin to catch up. Then it interacts with other visual and performing arts. I remember I had a conversation with Yal Azzawi, the Iraqi artist, magnificent artist, who was also raising somehow your question, what is it about Iranian cinema? How did that happen? And my response was, listen, our cinema is very syncretic cinema. Yes, it is aware of European context, particularly, say, Italian neorealism has had an impact on it, but it's also influenced by, say, Yasujiro Ozu, Japanese cinema. Ozu's Tokyo Story has had more influence on Iranian cinema than any poet that might have had. So we have to consider two factors, both material and serendipity, the composition of both of which come to form a cinema like Iranian cinema. Other than that, I've written like 3 books on Iranian cinema. Just pick one of them and read. Excellent question.
Good. Can we take questions from the chat?
Your call.
Mona is saying how to approach teaching world literature in the Arab world, or Saudi Arabia.
Okay. As I said, we should begin by facts on the ground. We need to, for example, begin with an awareness of the comparative, theoretical, and speculations that have happened in English, in French, in German, in all of these languages. And I just mentioned a few sort of prominent figures of it, from Goethe to Damrosch. There's a whole range, and Moretti says distant reading, and Spivak says close reading. So we need to have classes, and if I were to be there to write a curriculum, for example. So we should not be in isolation. We need to engage and debate and understand, but not from a position of subservience, but from a position of a purpose. And the purpose is to begin to think through the possibility of comparative literature or world literature from the location where we are. And where are we? In this case, we are in Riyadh. And that location begins with Arabic, but is not limited to Arabic. It has to be aware of Persian. It has to be aware of Urdu. It has to be aware of Turkish. So in addition to exposure to works of comparative literature, say, done in English and French and German and Italian, we need to develop comparative literature in terms of immediate regional languages. Here, I'll give you an anecdote. I was talking to a Palestinian and an Egyptian friend a few years ago, and I was talking about some magnificent works of philosophy produced in the 16th century. Mullah Sadra did this, and Mir Damad said that. And my Palestinian friend said to me, Hamid, these are amazing works. I wish they were translated into Arabic. I said, what are you talking about? They were produced in Arabic. They are in Arabic. But because they are produced in Iran, and you know, this silly fight, is it Persian Gulf and Arab Gulf? You say, well, first of all, it's American Gulf. Second, it's a wall. It's a mountain. It's a psychological barrier for you to cross and to be able to think in terms of a comparativity, that suddenly you realize that there is a world at your disposal. And as a result, in a department of comparative literature or world literature, you need to have the scholars of Persian and Turkish and Urdu and other adjacent languages. This is a preliminary way that you begin on facts on the ground, and then there are Barbara Metcalf, George Makdisi, a text such as Nas Muhammad Abu Zayd's and Nas wa Ta'wil. Of course, it's specifically about the Quranic context, but there's a tremendous literary implications in works that have been done in Arabic from Nas Muhammad Abu Zayd to Ayman al-Dasugi, that we need to begin, and these two figures, they both happen to be friends. One of them passed away recently, Nas Hamid, Allah yarhamhu, is the examples of how comparative literary and theoretical literary can be done with Arabic as the epicenter of it. And then you are in a position to enter a conversation, enter a dialogue, now a true dialogue between Arabic world, the world of Arab literature, with adab, and the world of European literature, or Chinese literature for that matter.
Yes.
That binary, Gharb and Arab, and just putting a dot, Arab and Gharb and Arab, has to break. We need different kinds of conversations.
Thank you. Abdul Malik is saying, if a Saudi novelist wrote a novel in English language, does it considered a Saudi novel or an English one?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, it is Saudi for a very simple reason. Because right now, what is the language, Ya Allah, you and I are talking together, is English. We have appropriated English, Aziz. English is now an Arabic language. It's a bizarre thing to say. English is a Persian language. They cannot come and spend 200 years, robbing us of our natural resources and oil and gas and this and that. And if we speak it, you and I, or Samaher, we speak it, oh, you are speaking English. Well, English is my language. I have appropriated it. It's mine. The same is that Arabic is mine, or Persian is mine, or Turkish is mine. So is English. So if a Saudi or an Egyptian writes a novel in English or French or German, whatever, it is also a Saudi. I mean, in the context, you can also consider the German literature, because the patterns of migration and demographic changes that have happened, that when Ahdaf Suwaif, Egyptian novelist, writes in English, Ahdaf Suwaif, when she writes a novel in English, it is both still an Egyptian novel and an English novel. So I am, as a result, opposed to this ghettoization of diasporic literature. It's not diaspora. Ahdaf Suwaif is a happy, healthy, productive. Her sister is a revolutionary in Egypt, and she lives in London, and etc. And then the other thing,
to Layla Abu Al-Ila, Fadi Faqir.
Exactly. I mean, the whole of the other space, Yala, is this internet space, is a digital space. Okay, when Samahir invited me, I was so happy. I thought I was going to Saudi Arabia, and they said, no, we are going to Andalus. Well, but this is space in which we're is also a space.
True.
The important, legitimate space in which now conversation and discussion and debate and ideas and theorization, etc., can happen. And right now, if this is recorded, I don't know, students can hear it from anywhere in the Arab world by virtue of this. So yes, if a novelist is writing something in English or French or German, still is a Saudi novel. It can also have multiple contexts. It can also be a French novel or an English novel, but it doesn't rub it because it's sensitive. And then the other thing, they say, it's a novel with an accent. Accent. Everybody has an accent. Right? I mean, I live in New York. We have 5 boroughs with 10 accents. There is no accent. Everybody has an accent. I tell you a story. My mother, my late mother, Allah yarhamha, when she prayed and she recited the Quran in her beautiful Persian accent. To her, she was talking to God. And then some mullah came and said, no, when you say, waladhalin, you have to pronounce the, this way and not that way. And my poor mother, anytime she came to the phrase, the Quranic phrase, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, she didn't know how to say it. She was embarrassed in front of the people. Have different accents, and accents are glorious. There's nothing wrong with accents. So writing with accents, speaking with accents are traces of our humanity. Why should we get rid of our accents? We should celebrate our accents. So if a Saudi novelist writes a novel in English with her particular sensibilities, how beautiful is that? Why should that be considered a default, a fault?
So what you're saying is that English doesn't belong to any nation or ethnicity.
No,
it belongs to everybody.
Shakespeare belongs to whoever reads Shakespeare. You cannot say that Boris Johnson has more claim on Shakespeare than you and I do. No, you and I have more claim on Shakespeare because we read him, because we teach him, because we have appropriated him.
I agree. Thank you for that. We go to Noura. She says, I'm so delighted to listen to your talk. I'm still reading Europe and its shadows to write my dissertation. I only want to thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you, Noura, for being here.
Mihaf, sorry if I mispronounce your name. What makes a literary work universal? Are there any specific features?
Excellent question. You see, the issue that we face is as follows, that the particularities of European experience has been universalized, whereas the universal experiences of an Arab or a Muslim or an Iranian or a Turk has been kept particular and not allowed to be made universal. We have novelists such as Marquez, who has successfully translated the particularities of Colombian and Latin American experiences into universal language. But that did not have to wait for the English translations of the novel to take place. The same are with the luminaries of Arabic literature. I mean, right now I happen to be reading Sana'Allah Ibrahim, one of my favorites. There is a universality in Naguib Mahfouz or Sana'Allah Ibrahim or Adonis or Mahmoud Darwish or whatever, and we should allow that universality to be articulated rather than kept. Mahmoud Darwish Sajjil Ana Arabi is a Palestinian predicament. Yes, it is a Palestinian predicament, but when he proudly says Sajjil Ana Arabi, there is a universality to it that needs to be theorized and articulated.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Allah, go ahead.
Dr. Sumaya is thanking you for giving us the chance to hear you talk. Asiri is asking, can a literary text be a world literature without being translated into English?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. First of all, we should not fetishize English. We have English right now. We're communicating in English. So we should have English. But if a novel is produced in Bengali, or a poem is produced in Arabic, or a piece of theater is produced in Kiswahili, right now the Nobel laureate that was given to the last person who was, an African novelist, they need not translate. I remember when Naguib Mahfouz won the Nobel Prize, there was a rush to translate him into Arabic and so forth. But it need not be translated into English. Understanding of it, theorization of it, teaching of it, marking its significance of it can be done in any language, including Arabic or English or whatever. But actually, the more a language is rooted in its historical experiences, the richer it is, and as a result, the more the possibility of its becoming universal while performed in that particular language.
Wonderful. Walid is saying, do you still believe in world literature? Or do you think it's already dead among all the political events and technological advances?
No, I don't think I don't think the world literature has even started. We only have one world literature, which is the way Europeans have theorized it from Goethe to Dambrosch. We have multiplicities of world literature that are waiting to be theorized, articulated, stated, developed, etc. No, I don't believe this discipline is dead. This is the title of Spivak's thing, but she is talking specifically about the discipline of comparative literature as it is performed in English or in European and American contexts. I think this is the birth time. This is the time that comparative literature around the globe, but in this particular case for us in the Arab and Muslim world, is just started to be born. And the moment we realize al-adab al-muqaran is not going to resolve our issues, it's just the beginning of a recognition that we need to begin to theorize adab. And there are a few wonderful texts that have been done in that regard, but far more needs to be done. So in short, Arabic world literature is not dead, is very much alive, is in fact is just beginning to be born.
Is that all over the world, or is it just beginning to start?
Specific worlds, Allah. We should not be kind of too generic. There are worlds such as Latin American context, such as Arab and Islamic context, such as Chinese and Far Eastern context. If you put Chinese and Japanese and Korean languages together, there is a world out there that needs to be understood independent of, you know, Frederick Jameson reading a novel and thinking, wow, what a wonderful thing. Going back to Samahar's question, Iranian cinema represents a world. There's a world out there. There is not just Kiarostami or anyone else. There is a world out there that needs to be understood, theorized, and put on this and universalized. So, we cannot talk about, you know, any. This is what I'm saying, that national literature is a misnomer. It just doesn't mean. You write something in Arabic in Egypt and everybody reads it. 300 million people can read it anywhere else in the Arab world. So it's not national. National consciousness is the literary imagination of a Saudi literary scholar is not limited to Saudi literature.
Great. We go back to the this notion of if a Saudi novelist wrote a novel in English. I think Haifa is asking the question: what if they were born and raised in the West? Is it considered Saudi literature? When you think, for example, Chinua Achebe, for example, wrote in English, Things Fall Apart, and it's not considered.
Yes, the African novel, because look at the Chinua Achebe. What are the constituent literary thematics in Things Fall Apart? There are African elements, tribal, African, historical, all African experiences. There are Christian elements, has to do with the history of Christianity, and our colonial elements. All of them come together in order to define Chinua Achebe. The same is if you go to Latin America and you read Marquez, or if you look at Diego Rivera's art, they are syncretic. They are not monolithic. There are multiple aspects into their work. So even if an Egyptian born to Egyptian parents in London or in Paris, but it still has sensitivities and sensibilities that are Arab or Islamic or historical to the parentage, still, of course, they are part of that. But as I said, they're not exclusive. I believe in the multiplicity of hermeneutic circles that can be around a work of art, that no particular, if you put it squarely within an English context, yes, aspects of that hermeneutic circle will be understandable. But if you put it within a Saudi context, certain other aspects would be understandable. We are ambidextrous, you know. How do you say ambidextrous بالعربي? ذو اليمينين, right? ذو اليمينين. We don't have to choose, because the parameters, our hermeneutic parameters, are not limited to, oh, is either Arabic or is British. I can do both.
True. I think somebody has raised his or her hand.
Hello, Dr. Ala.
Yes. Mike is yours.
Hi, Professor. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Thank you so much for being with us. We're very thrilled, very honored to have you.
My pleasure.
And believe me, we would extend the invitation to be here in person in the future events. And I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Samahir and Dr. Ala, for arranging such a wonderful evening. Thank you. Well, let me put an assumption forward here and just ask if you can agree with it or not. It seems to me like we're not asking what is world literature, but where it happens. For example, let's say that world literature might happen where an accepted way of thinking of the world system is questioned. A new way of looking at the world is born. There's a chance for a spark of creativity to shift the paradigm, and that's where world literature happens. To that end, do you think a professor, can we anticipate a location where world literature might happen in the next decades? Are we talking about geographical locations or social context where that might happen? And my second question is, I would like to take you back to Saudi literature. Do you think, or do you have any encounter with Saudi literature in Arabic or English? Whose responsibility is that to market and celebrate this kind of creative art in Saudi Arabia? Do you think it is the creative writers who can do that? Or maybe it's the responsibility of the scholarly work? And again, thank you so much.
Wonderful questions. The problem with always the second question, I forget the first question. First of all, I grew up on Abdurrahman Munif's fiction, City of Salt. Again, is an example of a Saudi novelist publishing in Lebanon and then becoming famous in the Arab world and then going global. Another example is, of course, Ilyas Khouri, Bab Shams, that you have a Lebanese novelist writing about Nakba, and then Egyptian filmmaker Yusri Nasrallah turns it into a film, etc. So the location as a result of current location, as I said, I'm very conscious of the significance of the digital age and the fact that we may lament it, but the fact is that the younger generation are most into Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and such than they are actually in the book. So there is an argument to be made that the world literature is beginning to take place somewhere else. But here, the significance of language is crucial, and the cultivation of visual and performing arts are crucial. I was in Mathaf, Arab Museum of Modern Art, a few years ago, and there are wonderful Saudi artists whose works are exhibited there. So we are students of literature, adab, but we should not fetishize adab, because creativity can happen in visual arts, in performing arts, in on the internet. So we have to be on the lookout to see how is a particular creative and critical imagination of people who are in communication and communion with the rest of the world. They can produce work of art that transcends any particular linguistic or literary or artistic medium. That generates its own poetics, generates its own aesthetics, generates its own politics. And we, as the students of this field, again, we need to be rooted. I'm very much in the sense of historical rootedness in a language and how it developed, in a culture and how it developed, and in a literary tradition and how it developed. But at the same time, our antenna have to be alert to the rise of, you know, different kinds of literary or artistic or performing expressions that are new, are you know, still in the offing.
Thank you for that. Thabit is asking, how did Orientalism impact our understanding to Arab literature in terms of context and writing styles?
Good question. Is it the power of Orientalism and Orientalizing other cultures is not limited for you know, Edward Said writing a book and now we have understood it and that's the end of it. It's not the way it works. Anytime you hear the expression medieval Arabic literature, that's Orientalism, because we have abandoned the project of periodization and canonization of Arabic literature within Arabic literature. Take a concept such as medieval or modern, even more troubling than medieval is modern, because we didn't create modernity, we received modernity through colonization. So we always have to encounter modernity through the mechanism of colonialism. So Orientalism can happen, excellent question. Orientalism can happen in our literary imagination that we assimilate backward into the dominant discourse that we think is universal. In my book on Can Non-Europeans Think, I give the example that if Mozart sneezed, and I immediately add, I'm sure Mozart sneezed really beautifully and melodiously, that's music. But the most sophisticated musical heritage in Arabic or Indian or Persian is ethnomusicology. Where does this ethnos come from? Why is it that Arabic music, I mean, the glorious tradition of Arabic music is not music, but is ethnomusicology, is a subject of ethnos. That is, you and I, Allah and Samar, we are reduced to our ethnos, not logos or bios, but ethnos. But my ethnos may have nothing to do with my musical taste. So the key to it is to recognize that these are Orientalist concepts, but I don't throw the baby and bathwater, as I said, together. If there are Orientalist literatures and analysis and critical thinking that is produced about Arabic or Persian or Turkish literature, I read it. And for example, take the translation of Alf Layla wa Layla. Alf Layla wa Layla was part of the literary and oral tradition in the Arabic context. My own colleague, Hassan al-Musawi, is a world authority on it. Until it is translated into French and English as Arabian entertainment. Initially, they called it Arabian entertainment, then became Arabian Night. We don't call it Arabian Night in our languages. We call it Alf Layla wa Layla. That's what the book is about. So calling it Arabian Night, first of all, origins of it are Indian or Arab or African. It's all over the place. Is yielding to the Orientalist imagination that has coined it. And it is not just Arabian Night, it's Arabian entertainment. I mean, there's nothing wrong with entertainment, but in de-Orientalizing our conception is decolonizing it, meaning beginning to come to terms with the history of our literary imagination performances in terms domestic to our lived experiences, and then universalizing that domestic lived experiences.
Beautiful. Another question from Haifa. What about artificial intelligence readings and critical analysis? Will it be culturally colored?
You know, right now, as I'm sure you have it in Saudi universities. The issue here is that final papers and exams are all written by artificial intelligence. So I told a colleague, we recently had a meeting in our university. I said, well, I always include Arabic sources and Persian sources and Turkish sources. So artificial intelligence doesn't know all of these languages. And then Madame Dobi, my colleague in the French department, says, oh, no, don't worry about that. They can do all sorts of languages. Listen, I am aware of it, and there are essays that have been written and warning people, especially the loss of jobs and etc. But I don't think in our kind of work, in our kind of a scholarship, anytime soon this will happen. And my favorite example, it comes from Persian carpet. You know, they say that the carpet weavers that they do carpets in Iran, intentionally they implant a mistake. So design is not complete, and that's out of piety. That the only thing that is without mistake is God's creation. So humans' creation always have to have a mistake. So as a result, I'm all for typos or ungrammatical sentences, things that pop up in all our writing. That's the sign of human, that there was a human in there and not an artificial intelligence. But as soon as I say this, the artificial intelligence can mimic it, can make intentional mistakes in order to show it's human.
Mihav is asking, does world literature overlap with digital literature?
As you know, we have now an issue of digital humanities, that humanities in general has to accommodate the fact that digital humanities is beginning to come forward. And world literature in the digital age, as I said, it will create its own, what Spivak calls idiomaticity. It creates its own idiomaticity, or Bakhtin calls it utterance. It would create its own utterance, its own idiomaticity. And in that context, yes, that would be also a different kind of world literature. But I'm not too gung-ho on, we will have a digital world literature that supersedes everything, especially because of my deep care for adab al-shafahi, the oral traditions and oral literary traditions and oral heritage, especially in the Gulf area. I'm product of that Gulf area. It's multilingual, it's oral, and is magnificent, full of song and dance and music and rituals, etc. So I'm not that optimistic or pessimistic, as the case might be, that digital humanities will replace and supplant human.
Iman is thanking you. Thank you for this insightful talk. Could you please give your reflections on the translation movement between Arabic and Persian literature, particularly in the context of the novel genre and contemporary works?
It is happening. It is fortunately or unfortunately, there are more translations from Arabic into Persian than Persian to Arabic. Though Samah Idris, Allah yarhamhu, used to run a journal in Lebanon, Al-Adab. He used to do based in Beirut, he used to do a lot of translations from Persian into Arabic, particularly poetry. But typically, an Iranian literary scholar knows more about contemporary Arabic literature, I would say, than an Arab scholar, unless the Arab scholar is interested in Persian literature, than the other way around. And I hope this will be addressed.
Asma is asking, does the Iranian novel face problems when transferring to the cinema? film adaptations and stuff?
Well, yeah, we do have. There are wonderful novels that have been translated have been adopted for films. But the fact is that Persian novel did its contribution. What has happened in Iranian cinema obviously is rooted in Iranian fiction, visual and performing arts, theater, etc., etc., and then has subsided. But still, there's a very healthy and robust scene in Persian in Iran about novel, and wonderful novels are being written. Especially women have become particularly prominent in the writing of fiction, have always been writing of fiction. But because of the limitations of translation, the world awareness of Iranian cinema is far more than awareness of the literary scene, obviously.
I have a couple of questions of my own. Of course, world literature can play an important role in helping us understanding the world around us. It helps us to see the world from different perspectives, and it can help us to understand the different ways in which people experience the world. World literature can help us to build bridges between different cultures. It can help us to promote peace and understanding as well. I would really be interested to hear your thoughts on the role of world literature in today's globalized world. How do you see world literature helping us to understand the world around us? How do you see world literature helping us to build bridges between different cultures?
First of all, Ala, I see the hand of Fahima Al-Rashidi. The hand has been up.
You can go ahead. My question
but allow me to
address you. Yes, please
address your question before that. Listen, obviously, in a world fraught with misunderstanding and confusion and animosity and sectarianism and war and hatred and this and that, of course, knowing works of fiction or introducing works of fiction are tremendous in terms of their impact on eliminating such misunderstanding. But the issue is not awareness of literature produced in Chinese or in Japanese or in German. The issue is the binaries that have been generated. And as a result, a typical Arab scholar or literary thinker knows more about French and German and English literature than they do about Chinese or Japanese or Persian or Turkish. This is the issue, which means we need to have corrective lenses that begins to bring events that are happening in African literature without waiting first for them to be recognized by a Nobel Prize in a European context. We need to be more communicative with our own worlds, immediacy of our own worlds. That obviously generates music, anytime for example, I introduce Qawwali music from the South Asian context, very few of Arab friends, colleagues, students are aware of this amazing, extraordinary musical tradition. So in general, of course, the more we know about world literature, the merrier. But what is needed now is to begin to kind of shift the axis of our knowledge production to balance what we ordinarily know about Europe or US by knowing more about Asia, Africa, Latin America.
Are we doing enough?
No, absolutely not.
Thank you.
I hereby appoint Samaher as the head of the next College of Translation and Literary Theory to begin the task of, but this time translating from Japanese, translating from Bengali, translating from Kiswahili, translating from, these languages.
Fahima?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your talk tonight. And yeah, I have a question. I've noticed that when you have been talking about so many dichotomies and that there are so many binaries out there. So we have the particular versus the universal. We have the Western versus the not Western. And this made me think about Felsky's call to transcend these dichotomies and her call for a post-critical reading of texts or literature in general. So yeah, my question is this, is there any way that we transcend these dichotomies that come out from power relations, from political grounds, to a space where we read literature or art in general as a mean to bring us all back to the work of art itself? And at the same time, how can we practice such or deal with these theories while at the same time be alert, as you said, to the problems that are there, that are grounded to the context of these texts? And thank you so much.
Excellent question. I mean, how I can do justice to that question? My attitude, Fahima, towards this issue of binaries and critical reading is what Hegel called aufgehoben, or sublimation. We need to be aware of these binaries, but not limited to these binaries. We have to, as you said, the word is transcend. Aufgehoben, one word translation for it is transcend. We need to transcend these binaries, but we cannot transcend the binaries without being aware of binaries. Correct? So we need to be aware of the binaries, but don't remain limited to the binaries. For me, to say, Arabs or Iranians or Muslims have been misrepresented by the West. Okay, everything is misrepresented. Now what? What do I do from here? Jack Shaheen, may he rest in peace, spent a lifetime about the misrepresentation and abusive representations of the Arabs in Hollywood. Okay, now what? Now what do we do? What do we do is Elia Suleiman, Mufida Talatli, Abbas Kiarostami. That is what we do. There is neither of these filmmakers that I just said, and there are dozens of more. They are simply doing what Jack Shaheen said. Oh, look, the Arabs are being misrepresented by. In a recent review that I wrote of the Dune, I said, the misrepresentation of Arabs or Iranians or Muslims has nothing to do with Arabs and Iran. It's misrepresentation and is a disease that they have in Hollywood. Why should I care about the Hollywood's diseases? So if I chase after Hollywood to say, oh, this representation of Arabs doesn't correspond with reality, has nothing to do with Hollywood, it has to do with me. Do I have something else? Do I have a filmmaker? Do I have an artist? Do I have a novelist? Do I have a poet? To go to that poet, not in order to say, oh, you see, Munif is a better representation of who I am. No, I'm going to read Abdurrahman Munif because he's a magnificent novelist. Or Ilyas Khouri, or Sana'al Ibrahim, or whoever. So there is no way of transcending the binary except through the binary. Does that make sense? Fahima, where are you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's why the term post-critical is a kind of fishy word, because I'm not trapped within the critical. Critical is the way I aufgehoben. as Hegel says, I transcend myself, but I cannot be wishy-washy in my transcendence. I have to be rooted in the lived historical experiences.
Great stuff. Haifa is asking again, what about the cultural gatekeepers? Is there a shift towards a move towards our part of the world? It's just, I think, or by opening branches, are we creating a cultural franchise, but never becoming the gatekeeper?
Could you explain what exactly you mean by gatekeeper? I don't believe in gatekeepers.
Haifa, are you with us? Can you explain your question more? Would really appreciate it. What do you mean by gatekeeper? Haifa?
At any rate, I think all gatekeepers are invitations to transgressions. If I understand your question of gatekeepers correctly. There is no gatekeeper, there's no barrier, there's no gate that is not at the same time an invitation to transgression. And the transgressive elements in the literary work is a crucial aspect of it. And there is no gatekeeper in charge of to what degree is transgression possible. It's just part of the apparatus of the literary prose itself to determine to what degree it can accommodate transgression.
Haifa is saying by opening branches of museums, by creating branches of Western publishing houses, do we choose what gets recognized by the world?
Excellent question. That now I understand. Listen, I am all for the open space, open parameters, open criteria of what is to be read. I believe in the possibility of in the formation of the public sphere, that the public sphere will determine, taste will determine canons and what is to be read. So I don't believe any ministry, any organization, any censorship should decide what is to be translated or not translated. And also in the global age, in the age of internet, it is almost impossible for such parameters to be implemented. But at the same time, I believe in the formation of critical community of thinkers, such as a university, such as a journal, such as a magazine, such as a film festival, curatorial policies of museums, publishing industries, etc., that will connect to the globe and has its hands on the pulse of lived experiences, and as a result allows for the formation of critical masses in such public spaces that is independent of any state organization.
Wonderful. Raya, you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Debashir. I think my question has to do with the question of Haifa, which is more about critiquing word literature. So we know that nowadays word literature is a very dominant paradigm, right, in the humanities, where everyone want to talk about, write about everything. And sometimes it seems that while word literature aims to, let's say, emphasize the particularity of certain culture or context, at the same time, it tends to, sometimes, of course, to universalize this very individual experience or literary text to the extent that it keeps reproducing. So, for example, whenever we are talking about Latin American literature, usually magical realism should be there. And any discussion of Latin American, we need to address magical realism. And when we talk about gold, oil should be there, women and certain representation of women should be there somehow. So my question would be, how can we resist this, I would call it market-driven notion of universal appeal, what readers want to read, and then what publisher want to publish, or what works to be translated, what to be in the canon. So so I think this is my question. So what do you think about this, Dr. Debashir?
First of all, you're absolutely correct that take the example of reading Lolita in Tehran, became hugely successful, of this particular person leaving Tehran University, going to her home, inviting some of her students and reading masterpieces of Western literature. That becomes a cliche, that becomes a trope, right? That then myriads of other examples are reproduced, or significance of oil, or significance of magic realism. They become cliche, they become trope, that once established then begins to reproduce. It becomes a paradigm that keeps reproducing itself. My response to that would be similar to the question of going through the binaries. That is, we cannot not recognize the market-driven, as you rightly say, the market-driven particularity of this, that this sells, this you go to a publisher, you go to an editor. If you say, I have a book about a woman who was incarcerated in in Taliban in Afghanistan, has written a memoir, or things of that sort. Or I have an example of a magic realism, but not in Colombia, but in Argentina. You have a market, you have a pigeonhole into which you shove these kinds of experiences. Now, I also believe at the same time that the lived experiences of people in various contexts, if they trust their particular, I wouldn't say individual, the particular lived experiences that is representative of a subterfuge, of a repressed universality that needs articulation. That can happen. I mean, particularly in our part of the world, given the varieties of issues that we have had, wars and dispossession and civil wars and revolutions and uprisings and all of that, there is a whole world of untapped lived realities that need articulation. And that, of course, it would have a difficult time in convincing a publisher in New York or somebody in Paris to publish you. But here is where local and regional markets and local and regional frames of references that attend to multiplicities of experiences that have happened in a given world allows for the literary or the visual or performing or theatrical representations of it to be expressed and to be articulated and to be historicized and to be theorized. Then you eventually will allow for a space in which this dominant market-oriented, because this market-oriented, you have to pay attention. Something becomes important in the Cannes Film Festival, and unless it is recognized in Cannes or Venice or Berlin Film Festival, nobody will watch it. Nobody will see it. There are film festivals that are happening or literary festivals that are happening in our part of the world, but they get their cues from. There is an Arab prize that they call it Arab Booker Prize. Why is it called Arab Booker Prize? Why is it not called Arab something else prize? So there is Booker Prize, so you model it on the Booker Prize. That requires confidence. That is really truly a next generation that recognizes there is literary production or artistic production or aesthetic experimentations that are not to be assimilated backward to what we already know. Allow for their particularity to be expressed, staged, and understood and historicized and the rest of it. And unless that happened, which is generational, because the generation before me, I mean, right now, people like me are on the edge of one generation to another. They always looked up to see what is happening in Paris or London or New York, and then that was good, so they begin to translate it. This is the reason that there is more translation from European or American sources than there is from Asia, Africa, and Latin, unless Asia, Africa, and Latin America have been recognized by a Nobel Prize in literature or a Cannes Film Festival before it is, acknowledged in our context.
Ghaif is asking, can you please address the politics of translation of third world literature to English in the context of new colonialism
Very
or
good.
new
Excellent.
Orientalism?
Yeah, no, that's excellent question. The politics of translation from Arabic or Persian or Urdu or whatever is very much decided by politics. That is decided by animosity. I remember, people like me do exactly the opposite. When there was an expression, axis of evil, Korea, Iran, and I forget some other country. I did the Axis of Evil Film Festival in order to show the other side of reality. But you're absolutely correct that there is a politics to what gets to be translated from all of these continents into English or French or German is very much decided by politics of the time. But going back to one of the earlier questions about the transcending the binaries, we should not wait to see which book is translated from Arabic or Persian or Turkish into English and then start kicking and screaming that is not representative of us. This is an interest of in the context of the politics of translation. We should reach a point of confidence, of self-reliance, of agency, that no longer cares what is being translated and into what, because inadvertently we're acknowledging the power relationship that exists between the United States and the rest of the world. That I am not. This comes from one of the interviews that Edward Said says, I could not see myself in my representations in the Western media. Why should I care? We have to change the interlocutor. The last chapter of my book, Post-Orientalism, is that in the mind of Edward Said, there was a fictive white male interlocutor sitting there. And unless and until that fictive white male interlocutor was convinced that Palestinians have been wronged, it is as if Palestinians were not wronged. We need to change that interlocutor. I'm no longer writing, I'm no longer speaking to that fictional white male interlocutor sitting in my mind. I'm talking to other people. I'm talking to people in Saudi Arabia. I can't tell you how delighted I am that you actually read me. And in this sense, we have appropriated the English language.
Another question from Samar. National literature is more than just a piece of writing. Do you think, Dr. Hamid, that most authors and novelists tend to be occupied with the world fame and world literature more than focusing to producing national literature that reinforces the national identity and creates a special work of art that affects their societies?
Maybe. I cannot judge for everybody is doing that, but the paradox of it is that the more particular a creative artist becomes, the more universal it becomes, because the more particular you begin to tap into and discover an untapped and unarticulated universality that is waiting for you to be expressed. But you see it also in world cinema, that they want to be staged and shown in Cannes, and as a result, but if an artist is to be shown, again, example, Ilyas Suleiman or Mufida Talatli, they didn't start that they want to be shown in Cannes. In fact, the more you look at, there are cinematic traces of Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton in Ilyas Suleiman's cinema, but he's a very Palestinian filmmaker. He's a deeply rooted Palestinian artist. the same way that Abdurrahman Manif was a Saudi writer, and his fiction is inundated with it. Then the more universal they become. And if your interest is to be recognized as a global artist, you will not become a global artist.
Great stuff. Thabit, just a personal reflection on contemporary Arab literature. The language is almost as if translated or written to be easily translated to another language. The topics are related to universal issues like homosexuality, women's rights, which is not bad on itself. It overlays the fact that literature is more about telling a story with a unique writing style, more than discussing a case or writing for a wider audience. What's your insights about this phenomenon?
I agree. Right now, the language, the more a language is distanced from its historical and literary and poetic and aesthetic roots, the more it is subjected to contemporary, especially in mass media and social media, of becoming anglicized, that yes, you may appear as writing in Arabic or speaking in Arabic, but in effect you're doing it is a translation that is under the influence of a generic kind of language, not the literary. There is a literary language in any language, including European languages. But the critical task here, which is not really with the states and governments and agencies and ministries and so forth, but with creative writers, is for their creativity to be rooted in their historical consciousness and historical awareness, and collapsing of this false periodization, medieval Arabic or modern Arabic or ancient Arabic. These are just entirely meaningless categories. We have to be aware of the periodization and canonization that is happening in Arabic or Persian or in another language. That is the factor that will prevent for us to allow the language to become really a constellation of neologisms rather than a language that is rooted in its own historicity and begins to produce and create in terms of that heritage.
Thank you for that. Any more questions or comments? You can open the mic or write something in the chat box. We're almost there. It's 9:45 Saudi time.
2:45, yes.
It's 9:45, yes. Anyone?
Well, time to go home and eat, Yala.
Oh, yes. Dinner time, huh?
Well, mine is
It's lunch.
Lunch and yeah.
It's lunchtime. All
Yeah,
right.
but I have this rush of adrenaline. It doesn't matter.
Oh, yes. All right. So Haifa is saying thank you. So
My pleasure.
as we come to the end of today's seminar, I would like to express my gratitude to you, Dr. Hamid, for this amazing talk and discussion. I'm grateful to all the participants for their active engagement, insightful contributions. Discussions have been both enriching and enlightening. On a personal note, I believe that we have all gained a deeper appreciation and understanding of the power and beauty of literature from around the world. I would also like to thank the Saudi Society for Comparative Literature, with the support of Literature Publishing and Translation Commission, for creating a space where we could learn from one another and explore the beauty of world literature. I urge all of us to continue reading, exploring literature from diverse cultures and perspectives. Let us continue to broaden our horizons, deepen our understanding of the world and its people through the power of literature. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much, Dr. Debashir.
My absolute pleasure. Let me repeat, Ala, my gratitude to you for graciously chairing this meeting, and repeat my gratitude to Dr. Samahar for her kind, generous, and gracious invitation, and also repeat my hope and desire and wish for me sometime to come to your magnificent country that you know how precious it is to all of us. Take good care of yourself, and I hope to see you soon.
I'll see you soon in Saudi.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Have a good night, all of you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.